In 1873, near Old Fort Defiance in what was then New Mexico, Timothy H. O'Sullivan recorded a moment in Navajo routine. People gathered around a loom, a sign of textile production. Next to it, weapons and hunting gear. Further ahead, corn cobs in the sun, indicating agricultural practices and storage during a period of reorganization on the reservations. In 1903, Edward S. Curtis recorded among the Apaches a scene of daily life. A woman collecting water in a woven basket, waterproofed with pine resin. Apache basket makers produced these containers for transport and domestic use. It was their responsibility to ensure the supply that sustained the camp. The practice was common in the Southwest regions. In Strength and Visions, Edward S. Curtis recorded a Crow, Apsaroki man during the Sundance. Slightly bent, he has leather thongs crossing his chest, attached to a pole fixed with stones. The piercing rite, central to collective renewal, lasted at least 4 days. The participant was only released after achieving a vision. Recorded by James Dempsey Hutton during William F. Reynolds's expedition to Yellowstone in 1859. This image of the Arapaho, with Warshanen on the right, is part of the first photographic set of the group. Circulating in albums and reports, it helped establish in the late 19th and early 20th centuries the practice of portraying frontier indigenous peoples. The Arikara Nightmen were part of a medicine ceremony offered to ask for rain and sustenance. The practice was banned by the U.S. government since 1885. In 1908, photographer Edward S. Curtis staged a reenactment of the ritual, allowing it to be recorded despite the ban and revealing tensions between repression and cultural preservation. Bannock Braves. After serving as field secretary to the governor in the Bannock War, 1878, Major Lee Morehouse took over in 1889 as agent of the Umatilla Reservation, Oregon. Between 1888 and 1916, he produced more than 9,000 photographs of life in Umatilla County and the Columbia Basin, recording from left to right, Jim Mukai and Ponga. Brave Buffalo, mentioned in 19th century Plains accounts, appears as a leader and counselor of his community. In contact with settlers, he mediated conflicts and protected rights. His trajectory shows tensions between European expansion, fragile treaties, and indigenous resistance. The lack of dates reveals a figure preserved through oral memory and traveler's notes. Gall, Fitzy, Hunkpapa Lakota leader born in 1840 in the Moreau Valley, acted as a strategist in the Plains Wars. An ally of Sitting Bull, he reacted to the death of relatives in the initial attack and led decisive strikes at Little Bighorn, 1876. He surrendered in 1881, lived on reservations, and advocated for political adaptation. He died in 1894. Chief Kalkalshuatash, portrayed in 1868, was part of the Nez Perce delegation from the Pacific Northwest in Washington, D.C. He wears ceremonial clothing, holding a feather fan and pipe. They sought to reinstate clauses lost in the 1863 treaty. Despite hearings with federal authorities, funds intended for the tribe continued to be diverted by government agents. Comanche Camp of Horseback. Tarakoip, known in English as Horseback, was chief of the Noconi Band. Afflicted by lung bleeding, he remained in his camp, where William S. Soule photographed him in 1873 at the Wichita Agency near Fort Sill in Indian Territory. Sick, he came to advocate for peace and surrender to reservation life. Among the Pawnee, Crooked Hand, despite his paralyzed hand, stood out in war campaigns and was cited by anthropologist George Bird Grinnell as the greatest warrior of the tribe. His son, Dog Chief, served as an indigenous scout for the U.S. Army in the 1870s. The photograph of Crooked Hand dates to about 1870, 3 years before his death. Among the Dakota, domestic tanning followed known steps. With a paste made from brains and fats, the craftswoman spread and rubbed buffalo hide, breaking fibers and retaining lubrication. Then she stretched, dried, and scraped it, obtaining a malleable material suitable for making tunics, parfleches, moccasins, and other everyday items. Courtship with flute among the Yuma. Youth sought partners by playing melodies, a practice that marked the passage into adulthood and dialogue between families. The scene was recorded by Isaiah West Tabor, a Yuma musician from Arizona, posed in a studio in San Francisco, around 1885, reflecting indigenous mobility and photographic networks of the period. Geronimo, Goyakla, born in 1829 among the Badonkohe Apaches, became a war leader after Mexican attacks that killed his family. He led long escapes and ambushes against Mexico and the U.S. until surrendering in 1886. Kept as a prisoner of war, he lived at Fort Sill, took part in fairs, and died in 1909. He became a symbol of resistance. The Tamed Tiger. Geronimo, the Apache leader whom General Nelson A. Miles nicknamed Human Tiger, appears in this photograph in a controlled pose, a sign of captivity and U.S. federal surveillance. A similar image with him in a painted hat opened his autobiography, published in 1906, used to shape his public memory after surrender. Interior of Mrs. American Horse's house. Oglala Lakota women and children gather in the domestic space in 1891, recorded by John C. H. Grabel. The resident was the wife of Oglala Chief American Horse, a prominent figure in the Great Sioux War of 1876-1877. The scene likely took place at Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota, United States. In northeastern Arizona, a Hopi woman knelt combing and shaping the hair of a young girl. The strands were rolled into side spirals called squash blossom. The arrangement indicated that the girl had completed puberty rites and was ready to marry. A daily practice among the Hopi, it also served as a public sign of family status. Hunting horse, Kiowa leader, appears with his daughters in a 1908 photograph taken by J.V. Dedrick in Taloga, Oklahoma. The image documents the Kiowa family in a phase of transition to the reservation system and new federal policies. He served as a scout for General George Custer. He lived 107 years and died in 1953, the year this magazine was founded. Thanks to public notoriety, Geronimo, Chiricahua Apache leader, obtained a place of prominence in the procession of indigenous chiefs who took part in Theodore Roosevelt's presidential inauguration. On March 4, 1905, in Washington, D.C., the leaders passed in review before the new president, and Geronimo's name drew special attention in the formation. Wheeler's Survey of the Apaches. Photographer Timothy H. O'Sullivan took part between 1871 and 1874 in Lieutenant George M. Wheeler's expedition in the Southwest, west of the 100th meridian. Overturned boats caused the loss of most of the 300 negatives sent east. What remained was the image Apache Indians, as they appear ready for war. John Grass, also called Charging Bear, was a Hunkpapa Lakota leader of the Standing Rock Reservation. After the Sioux Wars, he stood out as a mediator with U.S. authorities, took part in delegations to Washington, 1888-89, and negotiated land cessions. He advocated for schools and gradual adaptation, without abandoning tribal practices. He died in 1918. In 1891, photographer John C. H. Grabel recorded a camp of Brule Lakota typists, set up near the Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota. The scene shows horses gathered at the watering point of White Clay Creek. The image is part of the visual documentation of the post-Plains War period and federal control over the reservations. Mickey Free at Camp Verde. In 1860, the Apaches kidnapped Felix Ward, then a boy wearing breechcloths and moccasins. 17 years later, at the Camp Verde Reservation, Arizona, white-style clothing was beginning to spread. Ward appears there second from the right. He enlisted as an Army scout in 1872 and later tried to track the renegade Apache Kid. In Lame Deer, Montana, Julia Tuell recorded Northern Cheyenne girls in playful activity that reproduced collective practices. They cared for deerskin dolls and set up small tipis in a circle. The scene highlights the transmission of norms from the large camp, where spatial order guided kinship, tasks, and rituals in children's daily life. Among the UTEs, willow cradleboards were the standard. With the reservation period, the practice of fitting the board into deerskin bags spread, a solution that protected and facilitated transport. The 1899 photograph records Peret's baby in this arrangement, showing adaptation to the new conditions imposed in the American West.